In the depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like dying stars, there exists a truth that most species refuse to acknowledge. Emotions are not weakness, they are power. The Galactic Council learned this lesson the hard way when they witnessed something that shattered their understanding of strength itself. For 3,000 years, the name Vexthera had been whispered in terror across 1,000 worlds. This ancient dragon-like being from the void reaches had toppled empires, reduced entire fleets to cosmic dust, and made even the proudest warrior races kneel in submission. Its scales could deflect plasma cannons, its roar could shatter reinforced titanium, and its fury was considered one of the most destructive forces in the known galaxy. But on a forgotten battlefield on the rim world of Kepler, 442b, something unprecedented happened. The most feared predator in the galaxy knelt beside a dying human mercenary, and in that moment of grief, showed the universe what true power really meant. What followed would reshape the balance of galactic politics forever and prove that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can move mountains, or in this case, move dragons. This is the story of how a single human sacrifice transformed the galaxy's greatest monster into its most unexpected guardian, and why the phrase "Remember Kepler" 442b became both a warning and a promise that echoes through the stars to this day. The mining colony on Kepler 442b should have been a routine extraction operation. Captain Sarah Chun had run dozens of these jobs before, leading her small mercenary crew into contested territories to secure valuable resources for whoever paid the highest price. The red dwarf sun cast an eerie crimson glow across the barren landscape, and the thin atmosphere required everyone to wear breathing apparatus. But these were minor inconveniences for seasoned professionals. What Chun and her team didn't know was that they had stumbled into the middle of a territorial dispute that had been brewing for centuries. The Zephyrian Empire had claimed this sector 3 months ago, but the Void Wanderers considered it sacred hunting ground. Neither faction was particularly interested in negotiating, and both had sent forces to settle the matter with plasma fire and kinetic bombardment. Chun crouched behind a massive boulder formation, studying the tactical display on her wrist device. Her team of 12 humans was scattered across the mining complex, each one a specialist in their field. Marcus Webb, her demolitions expert, was setting charges on the main extraction facility. Elena Vasquez, their sniper, had taken position on a ridge overlooking the approach routes. Tommy Kim, barely 19 and fresh from the military academies on Earth, served as their communications specialist and backup medic. The plan was simple enough: extract the rare Earth elements from the automated mining facility, load them onto their cargo ship, and disappear before either the Zephyrians or the Void Wanderers realized what had happened. Chun had negotiated a substantial fee with the Terran Confederation for these materials, which were essential for manufacturing the new generation of faster-than-light drives. Through her scope, Chun watched as alien vessels began emerging from hyperspace. First came the sleek, angular ships of the Zephyrian Navy, their hulls gleaming silver against the red sky. Then, from the opposite direction, the darker, more organic-looking vessels of the Void Wanderers materialized like predators emerging from deep water. "Contact in 30 minutes. Elena's voice crackled through the comm system. "I count at least 40 ships on each side. This is going to get messy fast." Chun felt her stomach tighten. Her crew had fought aliens before, but never in a situation where they were caught between two major military forces. The smart move would be to abandon the mission and retreat, but the Terran Confederation was desperate for these materials, and Chin's crew needed the money. Too many of them had families back on Earth who depended on the income from these dangerous jobs. "Marcus, how long until those charges are ready?" Chin asked. "Give me 10 more minutes, Captain. The facility's security systems are more sophisticated than we anticipated." Chun cursed under her breath. 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours once the shooting started. She was about to order a tactical withdrawal when Tommy's panicked voice burst through the communications network. "Captain, something massive just dropped out of hyperspace." It's not showing up on any of our databases. Chun switched her scanner to long range and felt her blood freeze. The object emerging from hyperspace was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the largest Zephyrian dreadnought. But it wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. As it came closer, Chun could make out organic features. Massive wings that stretched for kilometers, scales that gleamed like dark metal, and eyes that burned like miniature stars. "Dear God," Elena whispered over the comm, "is that what I think it is?" Chun had heard the stories, of course. Every spacer in the galaxy had heard whispers about the ancient creature that haunted the void reaches, the dragon-like being that had supposedly existed since before most galactic civilizations had learned to build starships. But she had always assumed they were just tales told to frighten rookie pilots. The creature, which Chun now realized must be Vexthera itself, glided through space with impossible grace. Its arrival had an immediate effect on both fleets. The Zephyrian ships began pulling back, their weapons powering down in what could only be described as surrender. The Void Wanderers, surprisingly, also began to withdraw, though more slowly and with obvious reluctance. "Captain," Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "It's heading straight for us." Chun watched in horrified fascination as Vexthera descended toward the planet's surface. The creature's massive form blotted out the red sun as it approached, its wings creating hurricane-force winds that sent debris flying across the mining facility. When it finally landed, the impact was like a controlled earthquake, sending shockwaves through the ground that knocked several of Chen's team members off their feet. Up close, Vexthera was even more terrifying than the legend suggested. Its scales were indeed like dark metal, each one the size of a combat shield. Its claws could have carved through the hull of a battleship, and its teeth were like curved daggers that gleamed in the alien sunlight. But it was the creature's eyes that truly unsettled Chun, ancient, intelligent, and filled with a cold indifference that spoke of eons of existence. "Everyone stay calm," Chun whispered into her comm. "Don't make any sudden movements. Maybe it's just passing through." But even as she said it, Chun knew that was wishful thinking. Vexthera's massive head turned toward the mining facility, and those burning eyes seemed to focus directly on their position. The creature took a step forward, and the ground trembled beneath its weight. That's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. Panicked by the sight of the approaching dragon, he triggered his demolition charges prematurely. The explosion ripped through the main extraction facility, sending a pillar of fire and debris high into the thin atmosphere. The blast was impressive by human standards, but to Vexthera, it might as well have been a firecracker. The dragon's response was immediate and devastating. Its massive head reared back, and Chun could see energy building in its throat like a miniature star-going supernova. When Vexthera roared, the sound was beyond anything Chun had ever experienced. It wasn't just noise, it was a physical force that shattered rock, melted metal, and sent shockwaves through the ground that registered on seismic equipment 3 continents away. The return blast of energy that followed the roar was like watching a controlled solar flare. The beam of pure destruction carved through the landscape, turning sand to glass and metal to vapor. Marcus, who had been closest to the explosion site, simply vanished in the inferno. Chen's tactical training kicked in despite her terror. "Scatter," she screamed in her comm. "Everyone spread out and find cover. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." But it was too late for a coordinated retreat. Vexthera was advancing on their position, each step causing minor earthquakes. Elena, positioned on the ridge, made the brave but foolish decision to try to buy her teammates time to escape. Chun watched in horror as the sniper's plasma rifle began charging up. "Elena, no, stand down." But Elena was already firing. Her plasma bolt struck one of Vexthera's massive scales and simply dissipated like rain hitting a force field. The dragon's head turned toward the ridge with predatory focus, and Elena's position disappeared in another burst of destructive energy. Chaos erupted across the battlefield. Several members of Chen's crew were running for their ship, while others had taken cover behind various structures and rock formations. Tommy had somehow managed to reach their communications equipment and was frantically sending out distress signals, though Chen doubted anyone would be stupid enough to answer them with Vexthera on the prowl. The dragon seemed to be taking its time, almost as if it was enjoying the hunt. It would focus on one hiding spot, unleash a burst of energy that would reduce the area to molten slag, then slowly turn its attention to the next target. There was something methodical about its approach, like a cat playing with wounded mice. Chun found herself pressed against a large rock formation, her breathing apparatus fogging up with condensation from her panicked exhalations. Through a crack in the rocks, she could see Vexthera systematically destroying every structure in the mining complex. The creature's movements were fluid and graceful despite its enormous size, like watching a deadly dance performed on a planetary scale. That's when she spotted Tommy. The young communications specialist had become separated from the main group and was trapped in a small maintenance building that wouldn't provide cover for more than a few seconds once Vexthera noticed him. Chen could see the terror on his face through the building's transparent aluminum windows. Without thinking, Chen broke cover and ran toward Tommy's position. She knew it was suicide, but the kid reminded her of her younger brother back on Earth, and she couldn't just watch him die without trying to help. Her combat boots pounded against the rocky ground as she sprinted across open terrain, expecting at any moment to feel the searing heat of Vexthera's energy beam. But the attack never came. Instead, Chen heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of Vexthera's massive wings unfurling. The dragon was preparing to take flight, which meant it was probably done playing with ground targets and ready to finish the job from the air. Chun reached the maintenance building just as Tommy was preparing to make a run for it. She grabbed the young man by his equipment harness and pulled him back inside. "Stay low and stay quiet," she whispered. "Maybe if we don't move, it won't notice us." Through the window, they watched Vexthera's massive form rise into the air. The creature's wings were like storm clouds blotting out the sky, and the downdraft from its flight nearly collapsed the maintenance building. For a moment, Chen allowed herself to hope that the dragon had lost interest and would move on to other prey. Then, Vexthera's burning eyes locked onto their hiding spot, and Chen knew their time was up. The maintenance building erupted in flames around them. Chen threw herself over Tommy as superheated metal rained down from what had been the ceiling moments before. The transparent aluminum windows had melted into flowing streams of liquid that hissed and bubbled as they hit the ground. Through the smoke and debris, Chen could see Vexthera hovering above them like a dark angel of destruction. "Move!" Chen shouted, hauling Tommy to his feet. They stumbled through the wreckage of the building, Chen's combat armor protecting her from the worst of the heat, while Tommy's lighter gear began to smoke and char. Behind them, Vexthera landed again with earth-shaking force. The dragon seemed to be savoring the hunt, taking its time to corner the last few survivors. Chun could hear the creature's massive claws scraping against rock as it moved through the ruins of the mining facility, searching for any sign of remaining life. They reached another rock formation and pressed themselves against the stone, both breathing heavily through their filters. Chen's tactical display showed that only 4 members of her crew were still transmitting life signs: herself, Tommy, and 2 others whose signals were coming from somewhere near their ship. "Captain," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible through his breathing apparatus. "My sister just had a baby. I've never even seen my nephew." Chun felt her heart clench. She had led dozens of young soldiers into combat over the years, but it never got easier watching them face their mortality. Tommy was barely out of his teens, recruited from one of Earth's military academies with promises of adventure and good pay. Now he was trapped on an alien world, hunted by a creature from nightmares. "You're going to see him," Chin said firmly. "We're going to get out of this." But even as she said it, Chin knew the odds were impossible. Vexthera had destroyed their extraction ship along with most of the mining complex. Their communications equipment was gone, and even if they managed to send a distress signal, no rescue would come while the dragon remained in the area. A shadow fell across their hiding spot, and Chun looked up to see Vexthara's massive head descending toward them. The creature's eyes burned like twin stars, and its breath came out in waves of superheated air that made the rock formations around them glow with radiant heat. Chun could see every detail of the dragon's face, the intricate patterns of scales, the rows of sword-length teeth, the ancient intelligence that lurked behind those terrible eyes. This was it. Chun drew her sidearm, knowing it would be useless, but needing to do something, anything, rather than simply wait to die. She stepped between Tommy and the dragon, raised her weapon, and looked Vexthara directly in the eyes. "Come on then," she said quietly. "Let's get this over with." But Vexthara didn't attack immediately. Instead, the creature tilted its massive head slightly, studying Chun with what almost looked like curiosity. For several long moments, predator and prey regarded each other in silence. Then, Tommy did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped out from behind Chun and walked toward the dragon. "Tommy? No." Chun lunged forward to stop him, but the young man was already moving. "It's okay, Captain," Tommy said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I don't think it wants to hurt us anymore." Chun thought the kid had lost his mind, but as she watched, she realized something extraordinary was happening. Vexthara's posture had changed. The creature was no longer in an attack stance, and those burning eyes had lost some of their predatory intensity. Tommy stopped about 10 meters away from the dragon's massive head, and slowly raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "We're not here to fight you," he said, though he wasn't sure if the creature could understand human speech. "We're just trying to get home." Vexthara's response was to lower its head until it was almost at ground level, bringing those ancient eyes closer to Tommy's position. The young human stood his ground despite every instinct screaming at him to run. That's when Chun heard the sound of approaching engines. 2 ships were racing across the landscape toward their position, the remaining members of her crew in their backup shuttle. She could see Jake Morrison, her pilot, at the controls, with Dr. Sarah Okafor, their medic, in the co-pilot seat. "Captain," Jake's voice crackled through Chin's emergency comm. "We're coming to get you." Chin wanted to tell them to stay away, that approaching Vexthara was suicide, but she could see they were already committed to their rescue attempt. The shuttle was racing toward the dragon at maximum speed, its emergency thrusters glowing white-hot against the red sky. What happened next will be debated by xenobiologists and military strategists for years to come. Instead of attacking the approaching shuttle, Vexthara spread its massive wings and took flight, clearing the area to allow the rescue craft to land. The dragon circled overhead like a massive bird of prey, but made no move to interfere with the evacuation. Jake set the shuttle down in a controlled crash landing about 50 meters from Chun and Tommy's position. The ship's hull was smoking from the atmospheric entry and hard landing, but it appeared to be intact. "Move! Move! Move!" Dr. Okafor shouted as she emerged from the shuttle with a medical kit. "I don't know why that thing isn't attacking, but I don't want to stick around to find out." Chun grabbed Tommy, and they ran for the shuttle as Vexthara continued to circle overhead. The dragon's massive form cast shifting shadows across the ground as it flew, but still it made no aggressive moves toward the fleeing humans. They were almost to the shuttle when disaster struck. A piece of debris from the destroyed mining facility, destabilized by the earlier explosions and the dragon's energy blasts, chose that moment to collapse. A massive beam of reinforced titanium came crashing down directly toward Tommy's position. Time seemed to slow as Chun watched the beam falling. She could calculate the trajectory in her head, could see exactly where it would strike, could predict with mathematical certainty that Tommy would be crushed beneath tons of metal. Without thinking, she threw herself forward, tackling the young man and sending them both tumbling across the rocky ground. The beam struck Chun across her back and legs with the force of a meteor impact. Her combat armor absorbed some of the damage, but she could feel bones breaking, could taste blood in her mouth as internal injuries began to take their toll. Through her fading vision, she could see Tommy sitting up, shaken but alive. "Captain!" Tommy was shouting, but his voice seemed to be coming from very far away. "Stay with me. Dr. Okafor is coming." But Chun could feel her strength ebbing as shock set in. The beam had done massive internal damage, and she could see from the spreading pool of blood beneath her that time was running out. She had led soldiers in a battle for 15 years, had seen death in a dozen different forms, and she recognized its approach now. "Take care of yourself, kid," she whispered to Tommy. Tell them we tried." As consciousness faded, Chun was dimly aware of a new sound. Something massive landing nearby, followed by what could only be described as a keening wail that seemed to shake the very foundations of the planet. Through her failing vision, she caught a glimpse of something impossible. Vexthera had landed beside them and was approaching her fallen form. But the creature's posture was completely different now. The predatory stance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like concern. The dragon's massive head descended until it was only a few feet away from Chen's position. Those burning eyes, which had promised destruction only minutes before, now held an expression that Chen's fading mind struggled to interpret. It almost looked like the creature was mourning. Tommy, who was still trying to stop Chen's bleeding with his emergency medical kit, looked up at Vexthera in amazement. The dragon made no move to attack or threaten. Instead, it seemed to be watching Chen's condition with something that could only be described as genuine distress. Dr. Okafor reached them and immediately began working to stabilize Chen's injuries. But even with her advanced medical training, it was clear that the damage was too severe. Chen had saved Tommy's life, but at the cost of her own. As Chen's breathing became more labored, something extraordinary happened. Vexthera began to emit a low, harmonious sound that was part growl, part song. The vibrations seemed to resonate through the ground and into Chen's body, and for a moment, her pain receded. Tommy would later swear that he saw tears in the dragon's eyes as Chun drew her last breath. Vexthera's keening wail grew louder, a sound of grief that echoed across the barren landscape, and could be heard by the fleeing Zephyrian and Void Wanderer fleets from orbit. Dr. Okafor stared in amazement as the most feared predator in the galaxy mourned the death of a human soldier it had been trying to kill only minutes before. Whatever had transpired between Chun and the dragon in those final moments had fundamentally changed something about the creature. Vexthera remained motionless beside Chen's body for nearly an hour, its massive form hunched in what could only be described as a posture of grief. Jake, Tommy, and Dr. Okafor waited nearby, afraid to move but equally afraid to leave their captain's body behind. Finally, the dragon stirred. It raised its great head and looked directly at Tommy, and in those ancient eyes the young man saw something he would never forget: recognition, respect, and a promise that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. 3 months after the incident on Kepler 442b, the galaxy was still trying to process what had happened. The official reports filed by the surviving members of Chen's crew were so extraordinary that most military analysts initially dismissed them as combat hallucinations or propaganda. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Sensor readings from multiple ships, geological surveys of the planet's surface, and, most importantly, the testimony of witnesses from 3 different species who had observed the events from orbit. Tommy Kim found himself at the center of a media storm that he never wanted. News agencies from across the Terran Confederation wanted to interview the young man who had somehow formed a connection with the galaxy's most feared predator. Military strategists wanted to debrief him about Vexthera's behavior patterns. Xenobiologists wanted to study every detail of his interaction with the creature. But Tommy was struggling with survivor's guilt and the weight of what he had witnessed. Captain Chun had died, saving his life, and somehow that sacrifice had transformed a monster into something else entirely. He spent his days in the military medical facility on Luna Station, undergoing psychological evaluation and trying to make sense of events that defied rational explanation. Dr. Sarah Okafor had become something of a celebrity herself as the xenobiologist who had witnessed interspecies emotional connection on an unprecedented scale. She had published preliminary papers suggesting that Vexthera's behavior indicated a level of emotional complexity previously thought impossible in non-sapient species. The creature displayed clear signs of grief, empathy, and what can only be described as moral recognition, she explained to a packed auditorium at the Terran Scientific Institute. Captain Chin's sacrifice seemed to trigger some kind of fundamental shift in Vexthera's behavioral patterns. We may need to completely revise our understanding of how emotional intelligence develops in long-lived alien species. But it was Jake Morrison, the shuttle pilot who had evacuated the survivors, who provided the most disturbing piece of information. During their escape from Kepler 442b, he had monitored long-range communications and discovered something that military intelligence was trying to keep classified. Vexthera had begun moving through inhabited star systems, but instead of attacking, the creature was systematically hunting down slave traders, pirates, and other criminal organizations. Ships that preyed on the weak and defenseless were being destroyed with surgical precision, while legitimate vessels were being escorted safely through dangerous regions of space. The galaxy's criminal underworld was in chaos. Trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for decades were suddenly safe. Slave markets that had operated openly on rim worlds were being reduced to slag by a creature that appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. Admiral Rebecca Hayworth, commander of the Terran Confederation's Outer Rim Fleet, was reviewing the latest intelligence reports with growing amazement. In the past 3 months, reported piracy incidents have dropped by 73% in sectors where Vexthera has been active, she told her staff during a classified briefing. Whatever happened on Kepler 442b has turned the galaxy's most dangerous predator into some kind of vigilante. But the transformation wasn't without complications. The Zephyrian Empire had lost 3 patrol squadrons that had been discovered conducting illegal raids on neutral shipping lanes. The ships had been destroyed so completely that investigators could barely identify the wreckage. Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Diplomatic Corps requested an emergency session with the Galactic Council to address what they termed the Vexthera situation. This creature has appointed itself judge, jury, and executioner across multiple star systems, the ambassador declared to the assembled delegates. It operates without oversight, without accountability, and without regard for established legal procedures. Today it destroys pirates and slavers, but what happens tomorrow when it decides that our lawful military operations constitute aggression? The Void Wanderers, surprisingly, had taken a different stance. Elder Kothmira, one of their most respected war leaders, had declared Vexthera to be the long hunter of their ancient prophecies, of being destined to restore balance to the galaxy through righteous violence. The Star Dragon has awakened to its true purpose, Kothmira announced during a rare public transmission. The weak-hearted may fear its judgment, but those who live with honor have nothing to fear from the Long Hunter's wrath. Meanwhile, Tommy Kim was dealing with more immediate concerns. He had started having dreams about Vexthera, vivid nightmares where he could feel the creature's presence across vast distances of space. The dreams were so intense that he often woke up with his sheets soaked in sweat, his heart pounding as if he had been running for his life. Dr. Miranda Walsh, the psychiatrist assigned to his case, was fascinated by the psychological implications of Tommy's experience. Interspecies traumatic bonding is still a largely theoretical field, she explained during one of their sessions. But your case suggests that intense emotional experiences can create lasting neural connections between different types of consciousness. It's not just memories, Tommy told her, staring out the window at the Earth rotating slowly below the space station. I can feel where it is sometimes. Not precisely, but I know when it's hunting, and I know when it's thinking about Captain Chun. The psychological evaluation reports were classified, but Dr. Walsh's recommendations were clear. Tommy needed to return to active duty as soon as possible. extended isolation, and medical observation were only reinforcing his sense of connection to the creature. Tommy was reassigned to the crew of the TCS Meridian, a diplomatic vessel tasked with establishing trade relations with newly contacted species on the galactic rim. It was considered light duty, appropriate for someone recovering from severe psychological trauma. What nobody expected was that Vexthera would follow him. The first indication came 3 weeks into the Meridian's mission, when they were escorting a merchant convoy through the Helios Nebula. Long-range sensors detected a massive object pacing them at the edge of scanner range, matching their speed and course changes with uncanny precision. Captain Linda Torres, a veteran diplomat with 20 years of experience in first contact situations, was baffled by the readings. "It's definitely organic," her science officer reported. "But the size readings can't be accurate. Nothing that large could be a living creature." Tommy knew better. He could feel Vexthera's presence like a constant pressure at the back of his mind, a massive consciousness that seemed to be watching and waiting. The creature was following the ship, but Tommy couldn't understand why. The answer came when the convoy was attacked by raiders operating out of a hidden base in the asteroid belt. 3 heavily armed vessels dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began targeting the merchant ships with the obvious intention of capturing cargo and crew for the slave markets. Captain Torres ordered the Meridian to defensive positions and began coordinating the convoy's escape, but the raider ships were faster and better armed than anything in the merchant fleet. Within minutes, 2 of the cargo vessels had been disabled and were being boarded by hostile forces. That's when Vexthera arrived. The creature materialized from hyperspace like a dark comet, its massive form dwarfing even the largest raider vessel. But this time, Tommy could sense something different about the dragon's emotional state. Where before there had been cold, predatory hunger, now there was controlled fury and something that felt almost like protectiveness. The raiders never had a chance. Vexthera moved through their formation like a force of nature, its energy beams precisely targeted to disable weapons and engines rather than destroy the ships entirely. Within minutes, the entire raider fleet was adrift in space, their crews trapped aboard powerless hulks. But the creature wasn't finished. Tommy watched in amazement as Vexthera approached the disabled merchant vessels and began what could only be described as rescue operations. The dragon's massive claws, which had seemed designed only for destruction, proved capable of incredibly delicate work as they carefully extracted damaged hull sections and freed trapped crew members. Captain Torres stared at her tactical display in disbelief. It's performing search and rescue operations. How is that possible? Tommy stepped forward, finally understanding his role in this strange new relationship. "Captain, request permission to open a communication channel." "To the dragon?" "Kid, I don't think it speaks standard galactic." "Maybe not," Tommy said, "but I think it understands more than we realize." With trembling hands, Tommy activated the ship's communications array and broadcast on all frequencies. "Vexthera, this is Tommy Kim aboard the TCS Meridian. Thank you for your help. The convoy is safe now." The response wasn't verbal, but Tommy felt it as clearly as if the creature had spoken directly into his mind. A wave of satisfaction, acknowledgement, and something that felt remarkably like friendship washed over him through their strange connection. Vexthera withdrew from the convoy and disappeared back into hyperspace, but not before sending what the ship's sensors could only interpret as a farewell signal. The creature had delivered a message that would soon spread throughout the galaxy. Humanity was under the protection of the Long Hunter. The political implications were staggering. Within hours of the incident report reaching military headquarters, diplomatic channels across the galaxy were buzzing with activity. Species that had previously viewed humanity as insignificant newcomers suddenly found themselves reevaluating their strategic positions. Admiral Hayworth found herself fielding communication requests from governments that had never bothered to acknowledge the Terran Confederation's existence. The hegemony of Shard wanted to discuss mutual defense treaties. The crystal mines were offering technological exchanges. Even the isolationist Quantum Collective was expressing interest in diplomatic contact. But the most significant change was in how other species viewed acts of compassion and self-sacrifice. Captain Chin's decision to save Tommy's life had somehow communicated itself to Vexthera in a way that 3,000 years of warfare had not. The creature had learned something from her sacrifice, and that lesson was reshaping its understanding of morality and justice. Dr. Okafor's research was providing new insights into the psychological mechanisms behind the transformation. Her latest paper, published in the Journal of Xenobiology, proposed that Vexthera's behavior changes were consistent with a species that had evolved complex social structures, but had been isolated from meaningful emotional connections for millennia. Captain Chin's sacrifice may have been the first genuinely altruistic act that Vexthera had witnessed in centuries, she wrote. The creature's response suggests that it was capable of recognizing and valuing such behavior, but had simply never encountered it before. The implications for our understanding of morality as a universal constant are profound. As news of the convoy rescue spread, something unprecedented began happening across the galaxy. Other species started sharing their own stories of encounters with Vexthera, dating back decades or even centuries. Most have been dismissed as legends or exaggerations, but a pattern emerged when the accounts were analyzed collectively. The creature had always shown restraint when dealing with acts of genuine heroism or self-sacrifice. Rescue workers who stayed behind to help others during disasters. Soldiers who sacrificed themselves to protect civilians. Parents who gave their lives defending their children. In all these cases, Vexthera had either withdrawn from combat or actively assisted in rescue efforts. The galaxy was beginning to realize that they had misunderstood the nature of the creature they feared. Vexthera wasn't simply a predator or a force of destruction. It was something far more complex, a being with its own moral code, one that valued courage, compassion, and self-sacrifice above all else.